You owe me this after everything I've done for you, my brother said, demanding I finance his startup. It's just a small favor. A year later, he ghosted me until he learned I'd quietly made myself majority owner in the contract he didn't bother reading. Hi Reddit. I'm 41F, and this story revolves around my older brother, Damien, 43M. If I had to describe him in one word, it would be dramatic. Not in the shouting, flipping tables kind of way. More like the kind of person who lives in a constant movie in his head. He's the underdog visionary. Everyone else is an obstacle, and the world just hasn't caught up to his genius yet. Me? I've always been the opposite. Quiet, methodical, probably boring by his standards. I like spreadsheets, early mornings, and reading contracts line by line. Growing up, our personalities clashed, but not in the loud sibling rivalry way. It was more subtle. He was the golden spark everyone talked about at parties, charismatic, artistic, so full of potential. I was just dependable. That's how my family liked to describe me. Reliable, predictable, safe. We weren't particularly close as adults. We lived in different cities. Different lives, really. I worked in project management for a mid-sized software company and slowly built up a comfortable life. Nothing flashy, just a cozy apartment, a solid emergency fund, and a carefully crafted sense of peace. Damien, on the other hand, was always between something. Between jobs, between cities, between ideas. He'd pick up a new passion every few months: filmmaking, artisan bread baking, eco-friendly clothing lines. Some of them were genuinely creative. None of them lasted. So when he called me out of the blue one Thursday evening last spring, I was surprised. Not because he called. I mean, we texted now and then, usually for birthdays or holiday updates, but because he sounded excited, focused, like he had a plan. I've got something big, he said, skipping over the usual pleasantries. Like, really big. And I want you in on it. I remember sitting on my balcony, laptop open, tea half forgotten. I paused. In on what? A business. A real one this time. I've been working on it for months, talking to chefs, developers, sourcing materials. I'm serious about this. Now, this wasn't the first time I'd heard something like this from him, but something about his tone caught me off guard. He wasn't rambling like he usually did when pitching an idea. He sounded rehearsed, calculated, like he'd already made up his mind and needed me to follow suit. He told me he was building a company called Rooted, a subscription-based meal kit service inspired by traditional recipes from different cultures, using locally sourced ingredients. It wasn't the worst idea I'd heard from him. In fact, it sounded like something that could work, given the right people and the right foundation. But here's the thing, he said, and I could practically hear him lean forward through the phone. I'm at the point where I need investors. Just a little seed money to kickstart production and finalize branding. I've got momentum. I just need the capital. I stayed quiet. He must have taken that as encouragement. I'm not asking for charity, he added quickly. This is a real opportunity. I want you to be part of it. As an investor, you'll get equity, of course. Damien, I started. Come on, he said. It's just a small favor. You owe me this after everything I've done for you. That made me pause. I was genuinely confused. What exactly have you done for me? I asked, not accusingly, more like I was trying to figure out if I'd forgotten something important. There was a pause. You're kidding, right? He said. I was there for you when you got that job in Chicago. I supported you when no one else did. That support was a vague memory of him sending a thumbs-up emoji when I told the family chat I'd landed a new position. Still, I didn't push back. Not directly. I've always tried to avoid confrontation, especially with family. So instead, I asked questions. What kind of return was he expecting? What were the projected costs? What kind of team had he built? Did he have a timeline, a business plan, any sort of market research? He gave answers, but they were vague. Buzzwords. A lot of talk about vision and momentum. He got irritated when I circled back to specifics. You're overthinking it, he said. This is how people miss out, by getting stuck in the details. Damien, I said, details are how businesses survive. Eventually, he wore me down, not through facts, but persistence. He called again the next day, and then the next. He texted. He sent links to inspirational entrepreneur quotes. He made a spreadsheet clearly thrown together the night before, outlining how we'd all be millionaires by year 3. And here's where I admit my mistake. I agreed to fund him. Not everything he asked for, but enough to make a difference. Enough to help him build the foundation he kept talking about. But only if we signed a contract. That's when things got interesting. He acted like I was insulting him. "Do you not trust me?" he asked, in that wounded artist tone he does so well. "I trust you," I said carefully. "But I also trust documentation. It protects both of us." Eventually, he gave in. I had a lawyer friend, Harper, draft up a straightforward agreement. It laid out the amount I'd provide, the percentage of equity I'd receive, and a clause that if certain growth goals weren't met within 12 months, my stake would increase accordingly. Nothing sneaky, nothing hidden. Everything was there in clear language. Damien barely looked at it. He skimmed the first page, signed with a flourish, and said, "This is just a formality. We're family." The months that followed were quiet. Suspiciously so. At first, he'd send me updates, photos of recipe samples, screenshots of branding mock-ups, a video of him talking to a local farmer. But then, those stopped. I'd ask how things were going, and he'd reply with vague optimism. "Things are moving. We're in a creative sprint phase." I asked what that meant. "Don't worry about it. Just trust the process." By month 6, he stopped replying to emails. Then texts. The phone calls went straight to voicemail. His social media, though, still active. He was posting motivational quotes, food photography, pictures of branded packaging, none of which matched the samples he showed me earlier. Something wasn't right. And yet, I waited and waited until finally, about 13 months after he'd signed the contract, he showed up on my doorstep with a fresh haircut, an oversized canvas tote, and a grin that I hadn't seen in a long time. "Hey sis," he said, like no time had passed. "I've got something for you. And I've got a few things I need you to sign." And that, right there, is where things really started to shift. Damien stood on my doorstep with that same charming smile he always used when he wanted something. The tote bag hanging from his shoulder had a sleek logo printed on the side, rooted in soft, earthy tones with some elegant hand-drawn herb illustration wrapping around the letters. I admit, it looked professional, far more polished than I expected. "I figured I'd surprise you," he said, stepping inside before I could really answer. "It's been too long." He acted like we'd had lunch the week before. My living room hadn't changed much, neatly kept, warm tones, not a lot of clutter. Damien stood in the center, looking around like he was checking to see if I'd leveled up since he was last here. He always did that. Compared. Measured. "Wow," he said casually, "you really are doing well, huh?" Then he dropped the tote onto the coffee table and pulled out a glossy folder and a brown paper-wrapped package. "So, big things happening. I wanted you to be part of the next step." I didn't sit. I just watched him. "You disappeared for over 6 months." "I was building," he said, brushing it off like that explained everything. "It got intense. We were deep in development, late nights, supplier issues, you know how it is." "I wouldn't, actually. You never updated me." He opened the folder, ignoring my tone. Inside were papers. Contracts from the look of them. "Listen, the past year has been a whirlwind. But the product's finally ready. We've launched a pilot program in 3 cities, and we're getting great feedback. I'm bringing in 2 more investors. That's why I'm here." My stomach tightened. "So you want me to sign something?" "Not one," he said, laughing like I was being silly. "I need your signature to reallocate the shares a bit. Minor adjustments. It's just legal stuff, nothing that'll affect you." I held his gaze. "You should have emailed this." I figured it'd be better to do it in person. Less confusion that way. He pushed the folder toward me. The truth was, I already knew. I had been keeping tabs in my own quiet way. Harper had advised me months ago to request a formal business report, and when Damien didn't respond, she gently reminded me of the clause in our contract, the one he hadn't taken seriously. According to the agreement, If his company didn't meet certain operational benchmarks within a year, I would automatically gain majority ownership. Not because I wanted to take over, not because I didn't believe in his ideas, but because I knew Damien knew he didn't think about sustainability or follow through. And I wasn't about to lose tens of thousands of dollars just because he preferred vision over structure. So yes, I already knew what was happening. I'd seen the updated paperwork he filed with the state. I'd seen that he listed himself as sole founder and CEO, conveniently leaving my name off entirely. And now, here he was, asking me to sign away the very leverage I'd quietly secured. I picked up the folder and flipped through the pages slowly. You want me to sign over my shares? They're not really your shares, he said lightly. It was more like a placeholder. Symbolic. I looked up. Symbolic. Look, we both know you're not involved day to day. You're not part of the team. I'm the one who built this. You helped, sure. I'm grateful. But now we're taking it to the next level. And we need a clean cap table. He said it with such confidence. Like I should be flattered he'd even explained it to me. I sat down, set the folder on the table, and opened the wrapped package. Inside was a meal kit box, branded, sealed, full of ingredients and recipe cards. We're launching regionally next quarter, he added. If this goes well, we'll scale nationally. There's a real shot at funding here. But the investors need to see a clear leadership structure. That's all this is. And you want me to give up my share completely. He smiled, clasping his hands together like a coach giving a pep talk. It's just paperwork. You'll still get your original investment back, plus a nice little bonus once we raise the next round. But no equity. Not technically. No. It was almost funny. He genuinely believed that if you dress this up with enough polish and optimism, I'd just nod and go along with it. The fact that he hadn't even checked the original contract, the one that gave me controlling interest if he didn't meet his own growth targets, told me everything I needed to know. He had no idea. And that gave me time. I sat back, folding my hands neatly. Let me take a few days to review this. He looked momentarily annoyed, but covered it with another smile. Sure. No rush. Just, sooner's better. These things move fast. He left shortly after, still smiling, still confident. I watched him walk down the path to his car, folder empty, tote bag slung over his shoulder like a badge of honor. He hadn't asked how I was. Not really. He didn't mention the silence, or the broken promises, or the contract he signed without reading. He didn't seem to think any of that mattered. But it did. And when I finally picked up the phone to call Harper that night, she answered with a dry laugh and said, "Let me guess. He finally figured out you're the majority owner." I smiled, though he hadn't figured it out yet. The day Damien left my house, I let the air in the room settle. There was no rush. I wasn't in a hurry to make my move. In fact, I almost enjoyed the feeling of knowing something he didn't. Something he should have known, but clearly hadn't bothered to check. It was late that evening when I finally pulled up the contract he'd signed over a year ago. I skimmed it for the 100th time, but this time, with a kind of calm clarity I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. The clause was so simple, so obvious, and yet I knew it would have been easy for someone like Damien to overlook. He was too caught up in his own vision, too wrapped up in the narrative he'd created in his head. I'd been patient. Too patient, in hindsight. But I had a plan, one that didn't involve confrontation. I wasn't going to shout at him. I wasn't going to tear into him in front of the family, even though they probably would have agreed with me. No, this was going to be a quiet sort of revenge, the kind that had all the right paperwork behind it, the kind that ensured everything was above board. Because if Damien wanted to play with fire, he needed to understand that I could match him, not with flares and noise, but with calculated, slow-burning precision. The next morning, I called Harper, the lawyer who'd helped me draft the original agreement. I'd kept in touch with her, mostly for personal things, but now it was time to ask her something professional, something she'd helped me plan for all along. "Harper," I started, "do you have a few minutes?" "I'm assuming this is about your brother," she replied, and I could hear the grin in her voice. "I've been waiting for this call." I explained everything, the meeting, the package, the documents Damien had handed me, and asked her for a few more adjustments to the contract. Harper didn't hesitate. She'd already been on standby for something like this. I could tell. We can play this one of two ways, she said. You could show him the documents and remind him who's really in charge, or, if you're willing to be a little patient, you could let him hang himself first. I knew where she was going with that. Let him think he still holds all the cards. And then, exactly, she interrupted. Once he's deep enough into this new funding, you'll have all the leverage you need. And if he tries to pull something, well, the contract is airtight. I hung up after our conversation, feeling like I'd been holding my breath for months. I had everything in place now. All I needed was time and a little more patience. The weeks that followed were tense, that you wouldn't have known it to look at me. Damien's texts and calls were still coming in, but they were becoming more distant, more erratic. His tone shifted from confident to defensive as he kept asking me if I'd reviewed the new terms yet. I didn't reply right away, letting him stew. It was almost too easy. He started calling more often, at least once a week. And every time, he had some new development to brag about. We've got investors lined up, he'd say. The website's up and running. Or, the team's really coming together now. We're ready to go big. At first, I congratulated him. That's great, I'd say, calm and steady. I'm glad things are finally moving forward. But inside, I was preparing. He didn't know it yet, but he was already stepping right into the trap. Every time he mentioned his new partners, every new investment round, I was mentally counting down. The longer he went without realizing that the deal he'd signed gave me control of his company, the better it would be for me. And when he finally hit that tipping point, when he thought he was in the clear and had everything he wanted, that was when I'd make my move. It took nearly 2 months for that to happen. One day, Damien called me up with the usual excitement in his voice. Big news. The second funding round went through, he said, practically vibrating with energy. We've got enough to start shipping nationwide by Q3. I paused. That's fantastic. But tell me something, Damien. How does that impact my equity? He hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough for me to know he hadn't thought that far ahead. Well, with all the new investments, your stake has been diluted a bit, he said. But don't worry. We'll get you a bonus for your contribution, more than you expected. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, and it didn't take long for him to go into his usual smooth talk mode. You know how this works, sis. Things change. People get more involved. But trust me, it's all for the best. The best for him, not for me. And he still hadn't figured it out. Not yet. You never read the contract, did you? I asked, my voice a little quieter now. Of course, I did, he said, a little too quickly. It's all good. Don't worry. Then why is it that when you're signing up investors, you never mention that my shares automatically increase if you don't meet the milestones? There was a long pause. Too long. Wait, he said, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. What do you mean? I leaned back in my chair, trying not to smile. Well, Damien, if you'd actually read the contract, you'd know that I'm now the majority shareholder. Which means, technically, this company isn't yours anymore. It's mine. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. What? That's not possible. That's not what we agreed on. No, I said softly, it's exactly what we agreed on. You just never bothered to read the fine print. He stammered for a moment, clearly trying to process what I just said. You can't do this. You're family. I could feel his anger building, but I wasn't interested in a fight. Not yet. Damien, I did what we agreed upon. I waited. I was patient. And now, well, now the company is mine, legally. You're out of your mind, he shot back. I built this. I did all the work. You just sat there and watched. No, I said, taking a deep breath. I funded it. I made sure there was a company to build. And I made sure I had protections in place in case you didn't follow through. There was a long silence after that. I could almost hear him trying to process what was happening. His own words, the ones he'd thrown at me so easily, so casually, were now coming back to haunt him. Then, his voice, much quieter now, said, "So, what happens now?" Damien's voice on the other end was barely a whisper now. He was trying to gather himself, but I could hear the panic creeping in. He'd always been good at pretending he had everything under control, but now it was all slipping away. I could almost see him pacing back and forth, trying to put together the pieces of what had just been revealed. "So what happens now?" he asked, his tone betraying the unease he was feeling. I exhaled slowly. "Now, Damien, I'm taking control. I'll be assuming the role of CEO for the company, and we'll be revising the terms, making sure everything's done properly." There was a long silence, a moment where I could almost hear his brain churning as he tried to process the full weight of it all. He'd spent so much time thinking he could play fast and loose, but the rules had changed, and this time, he hadn't read the fine print. "You can't just take over," he finally said, his voice rising in frustration. "I built this. It's my company. You don't know how to run it." I didn't respond right away. I'd been waiting for him to say that. His sense of entitlement, his belief that just because he started it, it all belonged to him. But I knew better. And now, I had the leverage I needed to move things in my direction. "You're right," I said calmly. "You did start it. But I invested in it. I provided the stability, the backing you needed. And now that things are finally moving forward, I'm not going to sit by and let you make decisions that affect everyone else, especially not when you've demonstrated you can't manage the responsibilities that come with it." Another pause. His breathing was heavier now. "So, you're going to take my company?" "No," I replied. "I'm going to fix it, the way it should have been from the start. You'll still be a part of it, Damien. You'll still have a role to play. But now, you're working for me." He didn't like that. Not one bit. I could hear the frustration building, but this time, I wasn't budging. "Listen," I said, my voice steady. "I know this is hard to hear, but it's the reality. You had every chance to do things the right way, to keep me in the loop. But you didn't. Now, I'm stepping in. You'll have to work with me, or we'll have to revisit the terms and restructure everything. I built this from the ground up." He shot back, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You don't get to just waltz in and take it all away from me." I stayed calm. "You built it, but you didn't manage it. And now, that's my job. You have to understand, Damien. This isn't personal, but it is business. And I'm doing what I have to do to make sure it's successful." The next few days were tense. Damien tried to call me multiple times, but I didn't pick up. He sent me emails, trying to appeal to my sense of family, claiming that we could work things out, that we could fix it together. But I knew it wasn't about fixing things, it was about him losing control. He didn't have a choice. By the time I made the official announcement to the rest of the team, everything was already in motion. The new leadership was in place, and Damien was no longer the figurehead he once thought he was. I made sure he kept his title as founder, but he was now an advisor, which meant he'd no longer have any say in the day-to-day operations. The other investors, who were mostly quiet, non-involved parties, were informed about the shift in management, and while they didn't seem thrilled, they understood it was necessary to move the company forward. Damien was furious when he finally confronted me in person. "You think you can just take everything from me?" he yelled, his face red with anger. "I deserve this. You don't know what I've sacrificed to make this work." "I never took anything from you, Damien," I replied, calm and firm. "I made sure you got everything you wanted in the beginning. But now, I'm making sure the company actually survives and thrives. You wanted to play fast and loose, and I had to step in. If you can't see that, then maybe you should take some time to think about what it really means to be a leader." He stormed off that day, slamming the door behind him. But as I watched him leave, I knew I had made the right choice. Over the next few weeks, the company adjusted to the new leadership. Damien's ego took a hit, but I knew that, eventually, he would come to realize this wasn't the end for him. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where he'd learn how to be part of a team instead of thinking he was above everyone else. As for me, things settled into a rhythm. I began making decisions that actually improved operations. We streamlined processes, improved employee morale, and set clear goals for the future. The company was on a much stronger foundation now. Damien eventually came around, but not without a few bruised egos. He started attending meetings more out of obligation than enthusiasm. I could tell he resented it, but it didn't matter. He was no longer the center of everything, and he'd have to earn his place from now on. Slowly, over time, he began to adapt, albeit grudgingly. In the end, the company grew in ways I hadn't anticipated. Damien, while still involved, no longer had the power to control things. He'd been forced to face the fact that leadership wasn't just about having a title, it was about responsibility, and he had failed in that regard. I'd stepped in, and in doing so, I had not only secured my own financial future, but I had also ensured that the company would thrive. So, no, it wasn't a dramatic, public confrontation. It wasn't about tearing him down or making a spectacle of it all. It was quiet, it was calculated, and it worked.